Greetings, friends. My name is Jessa McLean, and I'm here to provide you with some blueprints of disruption. This weekly podcast is dedicated to amplifying the work of activists, examining power structures, and sharing the success stories from the grassroots. Through these discussions, we hope to provide folks with the tools and the inspiration they need to start to dismantle capitalism, decolonize our spaces, and bring about the political revolution that we know we need. While the world is fixated on Iran and the Orange Tyrant, Israel is violently annexing South Lebanon. It is a repeat of what we've seen in Gaza, and even the Zionists will admit that. The occupation's defense minister Katz just last week released a video where he promised that, quote, all the houses in the villages adjacent to the border in Lebanon will be demolished in accordance with the Rafah and Beit Hanun models in Gaza. We've seen those models. And he's not lying. They started again from the air like cowards, bombing dozens of villages until they were no longer recognizable. And since March 2nd, they've already killed 1,500 people in Lebanon, including 130 children. That date serves as a marker because it's when the attacks intensified. But the reality is there was no ceasefire. Like with October 7th, this date is when Hezbollah finally retaliated. The IOF are currently bombing bridges and roads and making it impossible for aid workers to reach the areas impacted. Sound familiar? And in the last few days, it has progressed to a full-blown ground invasion of sovereign Lebanese territory. The occupation is telling the world they're going to redraw their borders again. They're going to try to take even more land. And like with Gaza, the world is mostly silent, maybe even more so because of everything else that's going on right now. We're also not getting the news out of Lebanon the way that we seem to be with Gaza and the West Bank. But our next guest, he saw it all firsthand. Recently, Mo went back home to Lebanon. He went to bury his father and to be with his family. Not long after he arrived was when this newest wave of violence broke out. He's back in our studio to talk about what he saw, what's happening in Lebanon right now, and what it was like leaving behind a homeland being besieged by imperialists. Welcome back, Mo.
Thank you, Jessa, for having me back. I've been itching to be back to have a conversation with you and the audience and the listeners who are willing to listen with an open mind and an open heart.
I'm going to just kind of set the stage for folks a little bit, if you don't mind, in case they missed the episode. It is linked in the show notes, so you can go back and listen to it. And I encourage you to do so because it was back in January 2024 amidst the language we need to use, heightened tensions, incredible violence being enacted on the people of Lebanon by the occupation forces. Then there was a ceasefire. But when Mo was on, he brought us up to date. We got a history of Lebanon, especially as it relates to the occupation. And we drew some parallels together between what we were seeing in Gaza and what had happened during the Nakba and the occupation of Palestine. They were obvious parallels. And again, we are at a time where the Zionists are in Lebanon with ground troops, and we are seeing heightened violence again. I missed a lot there because that was a really kind of rudimentary update. But what can you tell us, Mo, about what is happening in the south of Lebanon right now?
So, as of today, where we stand in the south of Lebanon, talking Saturday, 27th of February, 28th of February, I think. I'm not sure. We were burying my dad in the south, in our hometown, and the U.S. had struck Iran that morning. The Israeli warplanes had started bombarding different locations in Lebanon heavily that day, that afternoon. And then a few days later, the Lebanese resistance had taken it upon itself to engage the Israelis by firing a couple of missiles across our southern borders with occupied Palestine to hit a military base for the Israeli occupation forces, which then unleashed, I'm not going to call it a response by the Israelis, because the Israelis, for the last 15 months of the quote unquote ceasefire, have been destroying and systematically clearing out what they refer to as a buffer zone in the villages that are right on the Lebanese southern border with occupied Palestine. But in the last couple of weeks preceding the current war between Israel and Lebanon, Israel had started to amass a large force on our southern borders, northern border of Palestine, southern border of Lebanon. There were multiple reports indicating that they were preparing for ground activities and for an assault on Lebanon. They weren't waiting for an excuse, given that they had started bombarding Iran and they hadn't stopped bombarding Syria, Yemen, Lebanon during the ceasefire. So if you listen to the media here in North America, you'd think that Israel is replying to the resistance, but then what you don't do is you don't dig a little bit further or read varied reports to see that that's not really a reply. It was a who started it at this point doesn't matter. Where we are today, Israel is engaged, or the Lebanese resistance is engaged and fighting back on different axes on the eastern side of Lebanon, southern eastern side of the country, on the southern side of the country, in different villages where Israeli army has advanced at certain points. Some reporters would refer to it as an occupation of Lebanese territory, but and I'm not a military personnel to discuss what is the definition of an occupation, how long of a period of time do you need to stay in a certain area to call it an occupation. But they have obviously crossed the internationally agreed upon border of south of Lebanon into Lebanese villages. They have tanks, they have troops, and they're being fought by the Lebanese resistance in the complete absence of the Lebanese army in the south. And that's something we will touch on later on as to why a country like Lebanon doesn't have an army that's fighting and quote unquote invading aggressor.
You won't find many media outlets using the invading term, but that's clearly what's happening. Let's go back to that quote unquote ceasefire and perhaps the moment that you just got to very quickly gloss over the fact that you were burying your father amidst all of these hostilities. But this isn't so much to revisit your grief, even though I know it's constant. But the story you told of being there and what the surrounding area was like when you got there, I think speaks to this zone. There's different words being described: a buffer zone, a safety zone, very cleansing language used for ethnic cleansing.
Yeah, very diplomatic language used for a polite diplomatic language to avoid calling it exactly what you just referred to, an ethnic cleansing, a forced displacement of people off of their land when they do not choose to leave their land willingly. It's a concept that sadly we refuse to face here in North America, given how we in North America have forced it on an indigenous population to create our current countries. But it's what's happening in the south of Lebanon at the moment. It's what happened in Palestine decades ago. What's ongoing in the West Bank. It's what's ongoing in Gaza. So let's just revisit quickly what's going on. After the last war that was in 2024, end of 2024 to 2025, Lebanon and the state of Israel reached agreed upon ceasefire. And the definition of ceasefire is the two warring parties stopping the fighting the military action between each other. After the ceasefire and for a period of 15 months, the Israeli government and the Israeli military continued its aggression on Lebanon, especially the southern villages that are adjacent to the Lebanese border, where they were physically had boots on the ground. They were sneaking in, booby trapping houses and demolishing houses. They were booby trapping villages, like blocks upon blocks of homes, civilian homes. These are not military barracks. These are not military airports. These are not military infrastructures as much as they would like to. And manufacturing consent by telling the world that these are Hezbollah or Lebanese resistance strongholds or hideouts to demolish lands, to use white phosphorus to burn fields and fields of olive trees and fertile land and turn it into unplantable and unusable land. It's not acceptable in anywhere in the world, except sadly for us in the Middle East at the moment. So they've turned villages that were already attacked during the war into what currently you see from satellite images in Gaza, from Beit Hanun, from Rafah, which were vibrant cities that were where hundreds of thousands of people lived, that have completely been turned into rubble. I have cousins, I have friends whose homes were still standing by the end of the last war in the south, where they have managed, because, and again, as Lebanese who have lived through multiple wars, we tend to, as soon as there's a ceasefire, pack our stuff when we're displaced and then return home. The will to return home and the urge to be back in your home is very strong with the Lebanese people, even now. So I have friends and family who went back to their homes in 2025 or attempted to go back to visit their homes. They were fired upon by the Israeli army. The Lebanese army tried to create, and at that point, the Lebanese army went down to the south based on what the agreement of the ceasefire was, is for the Lebanese army to go below the Litani River, which is one of the borders of these zones that the Israelis are trying to demarc. And they found their homes still standing. Some of them were homes that you can still live in. Some of them were at least there. And currently, these homes are no longer there. Not because of what's happening now, but because of during those 15 months of ceasefire, their houses were completely demolished. They were bombed. They were destroyed. And there were organizations, multiple organizations, that keep track of these aggressions of ceasefires, or the, man, I can't even think of the term when you break a ceasefire, a violation of ceasefires. And I think there were more than 1,000 violation of ceasefire. I don't have the number off the top of my head. I think there was maybe less than 5 violations from the Lebanese side. Those zones, those villages that were completely turned into rubble are where the most of the fighting is taking place currently. The Lebanese resistance returned, although the Israelis thought that they had completely destroyed its ability to resist them. And they had this idea that with amassing a large force on our borders, they could just walk through. And it's funny because it doesn't take a big military brain to just look back and study the last couple times they've attempted to do that in a geography that is not forgiving for a grand invasion. The Lebanese southern terrain is not a flat one like the Iraqi terrain, or it's mountainous, it's rugged, it's tiny, tight streets between homes and villages. It's hills. It's not easy to just drive your tanks and say I'm just going in for an invasion. They might have done it in 1982 when they not when there wasn't any resistance. The resistance was very minimal for them, and they reached Beirut at that point. So they've crossed about a distance of close to about 100 kilometers easily. And we're entering now the 5th week of the fighting and what some outlets call an invasion, what the Israelis might call as occupation of some villages or complete occupation of villages. They've managed to go in a few kilometers into the Lebanese territory currently. But even those few kilometers, they haven't been able to maintain those villages or those pieces of land safely without them losing personnel and tanks and armored vehicle and infantry vehicle and helicopters and drones. So that's where we're at now.
I think it's important that folks, again, realize that a lot of this was done during the so-called ceasefire, because it's this pattern of Israel. Breaking ceasefires is obvious, but kind of just laying the groundwork and warming the global community up to what their ultimate goal is more dispossession, right? Like more annexation of land and expansion of their occupation. And it's funny to hear you even delineate, the last war in 2024 and then starting 5 weeks ago. And there are markers that we can point to, but it has been constant, this and part of the plan. And so now what we're seeing is occupation politicians. And
it is also, I'd like to throw in there to talk about during those 15 months of ceasefire, the Israeli army managed to build on Lebanese land 5 or 6, if I'm not mistaken, military outposts overlooking the villages that they've destroyed, overlooking vast parts of the southern villages. So you not only manage to destroy during a ceasefire, continue to destroy homes and lands and not allow people to return to their homes. They kept bombing the Bekaa Valley, which is the eastern side of the Lebanese country, bordering Syria. They bombed multiple times in different cities that are not even on the southern borders, but they managed to build 5 or 6 military outposts. And those outposts, I'm going to make a parallel to what is going on currently in Gaza with the yellow line. So if we look at the map of Gaza and what the Israelis have created currently in the last couple of months, which they call the yellow line, which they've shrunk the already tiny landmass of the concentration camp of Gaza, shrunk it even further, and they've managed to turn the military outposts that they built there into almost permanent structures. And I don't know if I can only assume that that was the end goal for them with those makeshift outposts that they built. And those outposts are being attacked, obviously, currently by the Lebanese resistance.
I just wanted to add a little credence, not that we look to Israeli politicians for that, but the fact that they are openly saying exactly what you are saying now, that they fully intend to occupy this after the war, if that's what we can call it. So I'm just going to read a quote so folks don't think, we're just reinterpreting. But at the end of the operation, the finance minister said the war needed to end with a change of Israel's borders. And in fact, just like you mentioned, that the new Israeli border must be the Litani
River. Yep. And that's we're talking about not just 2, 3 villages that he's thinking of annexing and forcibly displacing and rendering uninhabitable. He's talking about 30 to 40 to 50 villages. He's talking about a population of about 800,000 to 900,000 that he's either saying they will not, and they are becoming very vocal about the fact that this, and it's taking a bit of a sectarian turn too, which we can touch on at some point. They've said the Shia population of the South, the Shia Muslim population of the South, which is a big chunk of the population of the South, not forgetting that there are other sects and other religions that live in south of Lebanon. There are Christian villages. There are villages of mixed, different Muslim, Christian, and Druze. But the Israelis have outright called it out, saying the Shia population of the South. And it has to do with the fact that I'm not going to call it the fan base, but the support base of the Lebanese resistance, or what people refer to as Hezbollah, the Party of God, who are currently fighting Israel and who have fought Israel for the last 20, 30 years. They don't want that population to return to their homes. That's the buffer zone they're thinking about. Because if I go back to my childhood, pre 2000, 2000 was the year where the Lebanese South was liberated. The Israeli occupation forces left, vacated the country after a lot of losses, after years and years of military resistance to them. So pre 2000, that Litani and south of the Litani area was occupied. Even further, northern of the Litani region was occupied. There was a zone where, as a Lebanese citizen, you could not just freely get in your car and go visit your village. You had to apply for a permission from the Israeli army, wait for that permission, be searched at the checkpoint. They had limitation to who can, what age groups are allowed to visit, all in order to control that buffer zone, which they lost in 2000 when they were fully kicked out beyond the borders of the Lebanese, like the current Lebanese borders. So that's the intent, is to go back to that zone that they had.
So this has displaced almost 1 million people, right?
I'm going to say it's slightly over 1 million. Some people will tell you it's 800,000 displaced. Currently in the country itself, we're looking at more than 1 million. And we're talking a country of 4.4 million, plus or minus, given that we have Syrian internally, Syrian displaced population. We have Palestinian refugees in multiple refugee camps in Lebanon that don't count as Lebanese citizens. But geographically within Lebanon, you're talking between 4 to 6 million. You have about 1.1 to 1.2 displaced, partly from the south of the country, but partly also from the southern suburb of the city of Beirut, the capital Beirut, or those have vacated their homes and have left their homes because under forcible displacement orders, or if we want to just follow what the media calls it, or what the Israelis call it, is their evacuation orders. Usually, I grew up thinking that evacuation is when there's a natural disaster and you help people who are trapped in their homes because, you're a Samaritan, you're the Red Cross, you're the army, you're the fire and rescue, and you're just evacuating people to safety. The Israelis use the word evacuation when they just tell you, hey, we're going to flatten out your apartment buildings, we're going to flatten out your neighborhoods. You have an hour to leave. You have a certain amount of time to leave, which we can all agree is called forced displacement.
Which is a war crime, right? They try to use it as an example of how compassionate they are. We tell them, and that isn't even always the case, but even that in itself, it is a war crime. There's just so many parallels between what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in Lebanon. But I think nothing really set it home as much as reading the pamphlets that were being dropped on Lebanon that were explicitly promising to turn it into Gaza, right? And even their politicians have used Rafah as an example. They call it a model of what they plan to do with the villages of southern Lebanon. And I think I'm so fucking frustrated, obviously, because we've talked to so many people for years who've been fighting our government and using whatever kind of leverages of power they think that they have, and wrapped up in stopping this genocide, only for this model to actually now just serve as some sort of model back the way to be used on the people of Lebanon. We see Iran under bombardment. Schools, hospitals, the use of drones overhead to terrorize civilians. And I think we failed in some regard, like not like individuals, but
As a human race,
yeah, that
maybe.
we allowed them to do whatever they wanted.
Yeah, there was clearly an impunity that they functioned under throughout. We're now going on 3 years of a genocide in Gaza, and at the start of the genocide in Gaza, there was multiple times, and I think we've talked about it in our on our last conversation, you and I, the Dahiya doctrine that they referred to in their approach to the destruction of Gaza, and the forcible displacement and the destruction of complete towns and cities. And the Dahiya is referring to, in Arabic, the word Dahiya is a suburb. In Lebanon, we call the southern suburb of Beirut the Dahiya. It's multiple neighborhoods that are bustling with life, that are very overpopulated. And in the 2006 war, Israel flattened big portions of the southern suburb of Beirut, the Dahiya, trying to render it uninhabitable, or trying to inflict as much pain and destruction to try and turn people onto the Lebanese resistance, turning your own support base on you as a resistance. And of course, that didn't work because the Dahi was rebuilt over the next couple of years after 2006. People went back to their homes, rebuilt businesses, rebuilt neighborhoods. Life moved on. The support for the resistance never waned. And then they got into Gaza and they're like, we're going to do what we did to Dahiya here in Gaza. And then 2 years and a half later, they turned back into the south of Lebanon and they said, we're going to now turn what we did in Gaza without anyone stopping us, without anyone blinking an eye. And we're going to now do it under a ceasefire, which they did for big parts of the south, like those villages along the southern border.
One of the things the pamphlets did is encouraging folks to, disarm Hezbollah, right? It's your fault that they exist. They're same script as used with Hamas. And they're just so fucking open about it. It's disgusting. But let's talk about, you said it didn't divide the people, but let's revisit that a little bit, especially when we're talking about the massive displacement that's happening, as well as the language that's being used by the Lebanese government that kind of reads like disassociating itself from all of it. And it's very strange language coming from a government whose sovereignty has been so grossly violated. I think when I spoke to you before and you told me about these military outposts and I said, like, are they under attack? Like, are people tolerating this? And of course, the resistance forces would not tolerate it. I mean, they take strategic points and it's not as easy as I'd like to make it seem. It was so indignant. I was like, what do you mean there are military outposts, and what is the Lebanese government doing about that? Because Canada, we just went through this really hard phase of asserting our sovereignty. We are going to spend billions trying to protect our Arctic sovereignty. We seem to think,
well, aren't they just spending? I was just reading about the base that's being built in Labrador. Think a military base for 80, what is it, 8 or 80 billion? I'm not sure.
yes, it's very, very important that we invest a lot of money and arms into securing our sovereignty. But we see no issue, because really even the statements that have come out of our government are very focused on the war crime aspect of bombing schools and residential areas, or the assertion that they're going to actually take land, like really watered down awful statements, right? But they are commenting, but there's nothing that really challenges the idea that Israel has the right to this buffer zone, because we have, like you said, tolerated this model almost exactly. And who are we expecting them to stop it? But
no, and we sadly, I'm we're no longer expecting, and I'm speaking by we, I mean me, and as a Lebanese, as people of the south of Lebanon, we're not expecting the world to stop Israel, or to put any pressure, to boycott, to sanction. Like, and sadly, I'm not expecting my own government at this point to stop Israel. We got to go back a little bit and remember that our Lebanese army, under multiple governments, under multiple leadership, is very limited to what kind of arms they are allowed to have, what kind of arms they're allowed to purchase, what kind of ammunition, what kind of, like, they're funded heavily by just the American army. They're given leftover military equipment that is no longer in use by the American army, that is being decommissioned. And then it's being given as grants, being sold, or it's not an army that can actually stand up in a traditional army to army fight against the Israeli army. We're talking about the Israeli army, one of the most well equipped, well funded, sadly, by American and Canadian and Western tax dollars and funds and whatever we want to talk about. Like, we sit and talk endlessly how we have helped build that army in the West, prompted it to where it is. But it is one of the strongest army. The Lebanese army is no match to it. Now, in terms of a government, we're talking, and it saddens me a lot to see the current government stand on the resistance and how quickly they bent the knee to the Western leadership. We're talking about currently a prime minister who sat on the International Court of Justice when the International Court of Justice came out with its ruling against Netanyahu as a war criminal, who now, as a Lebanese prime minister, so you're coming from the International Court of Justice, who everyone knows their stance on the current prime minister of Israel and his secretary of war back then. And now you're the prime minister of Lebanon, and your stand is to criminalize the Lebanese currently the Lebanese resistance, or Hezbollah, has been criminalized as a terrorist organization by its own government. Well, it's always been criminalized. It's always been labeled as a terrorist organization by the West, right? But this is the first Lebanese government that has outright, during an Israeli aggression, not after or in the month following an aggression, during an aggression, has called its own resistance, or the Lebanese resistance, terrorist organization. They are asking the Lebanese resistance to cease its attack on its activities, to hand over its weapons in the midst of Israel bombing and killing civilians in the thousands. We're up to 1,100 something as of yesterday, I think, Lebanese civilians killed.
1,318 they mark since March 2nd. So that does not include those killed during the ceasefire and before that, and 4,000 injured.
That does not include those who are dying and not being given access to first aid or to search and rescue, to come and dig them out also.
I think one thing maybe you can help me understand, or maybe you don't understand it yourself because I know you're disappointed in it, but how can the Lebanese government not experience political pressure from below to do something about where they're at now? Like, there'd be a certain toleration, I guess, for what's been happening in the South, but like, this is escalated now. There's targets in neighborhoods that thought they were safe, and they're up against forces that, are not being held back by anything. So more people than the southern parts of Lebanon need to worry. So what kind of pressure is the Lebanese government facing to do something then? If the resistance wing is not the answer, what is?
Ultimate goal is the normalization with Israel.
And losing half their territory?
If
or
that is the
more?
price, if that is the price, and at this point there's a mentality for certain politicians in Lebanon, and for a certain direction that's being supported and pushed by whether it's France, whether it's the US, that this is the price for, like, if we have to create that buffer zone, so then Lebanon can then prosper, quote unquote. And we all know that Lebanon won't be allowed to prosper with the existence of the West's ally in the region as it is unhinged currently. Because I don't want to go into, that's a whole 12th series episode about the existence of Israel in the region as a state and the legitimacy or all that stuff. But that's what the current. The Lebanese government has always said that they will be the last country to normalize with Israel, last Arab country to normalize. Like, we would refuse to normalize with Israel. We refuse to have peace with Israel. And at this point, I think the West is pressing, well, Syria is almost normalized with Israel. Um, Jordan is normalized with Israel, has an embassy. Egypt has an embassy. Here you go. Look at the Gulf states. They have an embassy. Then they have normalized relationship with Israel. So the pressure now is mounting on the Lebanese government and the Lebanese population to lay down and completely surrender, or else be left to get destroyed.
This trying to expect Israel to act as a rational actor, as the Lebanese government, to me, is asinine, and probably full of complexities that I'm unaware of.
It is, and it is a complex, but not one that is so complex that it's so irrational. It's not a matter of irrationality here. It's just a matter of helplessness, almost. Like, you're a government that's acting with such helplessness instead of standing up at a time where, especially at a time where where your sovereignty as as a country, where your actual legal borders are being attacked and violated.
And being declared as part of a project of annexation. But, I also, for you, valid. For me to sit and criticize the Lebanese government is maybe not my place. But, I appreciate trying to give us a better understanding of
No, but
what.
it also gives us an understanding into the tools that Israel and its Western allies use in the region, and this is weakening a government like the Lebanese government, and forcing a population to accept surrender, displacing a million, 1.2 million, forcing them into areas. And mind you, I would like to stress out that when you force 1.1 million people in a country of 4 million, 5 million, when you forcibly displace people like that, like, imagine here in Canada, if we were to forcibly displace 20% of the Canadian population, what kind of problems would we end up with in those areas that host the internally displaced refugees? Like, what kind of, imagine, as much as we pride ourselves and Canadians pride themselves on being hospitable and courteous and polite, like, logistically, what kind of problems would you end up with? And we aren't in Lebanon. Like, those 1 point something million human being, young, old families, are being welcomed in multiple parts of the country. They're being fed, they're being taken care of, because we've lived through this multiple times, and most probably will live through it again in the future. And sadly, Israel is playing on the hopes that pushing that pressure, pushing the agenda of sectarianism, turning Lebanese people on themselves, will play into the divide and conquer, which makes then their invasion and their territorial claim to parts of the country easier.
Yeah, highlighting that, divide. And we did see some neighborhoods, citizens in Beirut, falling for it. And
And you'll hear, and they'll be, but like, I wouldn't. I think they're banking on a lot more than what they have just had at the moment. Like, I think within the Israeli mentality, they were really hoping that a few strikes in neighborhoods that they've never struck before, a few targeted assassinations, the assassinating members of the Lebanese resistance, let's say, we're talking about the resistance of tens of thousands, of hundreds of thousands of members, active military members. And then they're hoping that these regions will just turn on the internally displaced refugees. And then that might start. And we've had a history of a civil war, 15-year civil war, some civil unrest in the last couple of years, all driven by sectarianism. That's what I think Israel is banking on, that might just be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
yeah, I mean, I was going to say, like, there was examples of people not wanting or even passing laws that you couldn't let your apartment out to anybody who had migrated from the south, lest it
Yep,
become.
they are municipalities of certain neighborhoods and certain villages that have very clearly, at the start, within the first week of the war on Lebanon, have just called out saying that you are not allowed to rent out to anyone at the moment. If you have an apartment that's vacant, if you have a house, a property that you own, we're not renting out. We're not taking in displaced refugees. But those are minorities. Those are really small. And if the media will capitalize on that to just push an agenda of divide, not to say that it's not a real danger. It's a real danger. It's a country that has experienced 15 years of war because of that sectarian divide. But currently, and that's a part of me that's maybe proud of the fact that we've navigated this, and we've just fifth week now, and the Lebanese have just embraced each other, and they've embraced the currently displaced population. And I think that simple act is an act of defiance against an occupying aggressor.
I'm glad you made that point, because it's a tactic utilized against people everywhere, right? The divide and conquer, the finding a scapegoat, the looking at each other rather than the actual oppressor, right? Even us here discussing these actors rather than the instigator. All kind of serve that purpose, but there's lessons to be learned there for us here and in the diaspora. And I'm wondering if maybe we can shift a little bit from the geopolitical to the personal, because there have been moments where you have helped me better understand what it must be like as being part of a diaspora under so much stress and experiencing war. For example, like you're surrounded by settlers here that have never experienced anything like that. And sometimes we don't know, we don't understand it, and we don't know what it's like for you, and we don't know how to maybe be the best comrades for folks. And we are working closely with the Palestinian diaspora, the Iranian diaspora, the Lebanese diaspora, and more. And so I'm wondering if maybe we can spend a few moments on, checking in and how we can act in solidarity, but on a personal level as well. Like, we know what tasks we can do as activists and organizers.
Yeah, and I think speaking to you about what we can do as activists, and it's something that goes unsaid, given the amount of work that you, especially Jessa, and a lot of your supporters and a lot of your listeners engage in and day out, and bringing awareness and fighting back against legislations and just in educating, like, that goes unsaid. In terms of a personal, it's becoming almost harder and harder to, for me on a personal level, to just navigate the mundane of how are you feeling, or like the questions that you almost anticipate before you even see someone, and you're like, I just don't want to, like, don't ask me how I'm feeling. And I know it comes maybe from a point of caring, but that's superficial caring sometimes just hurts a bit more. Maybe it doesn't hurt, it just creates more disconnect. It creates some dissonance. It just we already live with enough guilt of our own safety here. And that goes, and I'm not just talking about the Lebanese diaspora. I'm talking about the immigrant diaspora across the world. People immigrate because they seek safety, because they seek a better life, because where they grew up, they don't have all that opportunity, maybe. A lot of people immigrate because of circumstances beyond their control. And then they live with the guilt of having left behind family, friends, land, languages, culture. And the price they pay. And that internal guilt is real. And then just those small questions of like, how are you feeling, makes them revisit that guilt. So I don't know, it's a matter of maybe showing up as a community, and that's part of, like, I think the questions, and we were talking about it. A friend was asking about, like, how do people just, like, how's your, like, I still have my mom and my sister living in Lebanon, and at the moment they don't have a choice to leave. They don't have a visa to just pick up, go to the airport, and buy an expensive ticket to leave the country. They don't have access to just, they're not leaving their home because we have a home and we have dignity and we're staying home. So my friend was asking me, like, how are they, like, living? And I was like, you know what? I was there for 3 weeks through this, about 3 weeks, and people were still going about their days. And for us here, you might think that that's just strange, but surrounding yourself with a community and living in a community, and it's something I find we're becoming more and more distant from here. There's maybe the younger generation starting to trying to rebuild communities. Our society is just is built on a lot of individualism here. Like our homes, our urban homes, our apartment buildings in city, or our rural like neighborhoods are so separated. Yes, we live in neighborhoods, but we are so separated from each other. We don't do a lot of things as communities. So that's, go back to communal things. So you want to care, you want to connect with people from the diaspora, people who are living this nightmare on their screens day in and day out. Show up to them. Don't ask them what you want. How would you like me to help you is not a question. For example, I want to hear, because, and I'm not being mean, because that question entails that I have to now make a decision. On top of all the stress that I'm living, I don't want to make those extra decisions. Tell your friends, hey, I'm showing up to cook you dinner. Hey, I'm coming over to watch a movie. Not be forceful, but take the decision making out of their hand for a bit, maybe. That shows caring. For me, that shows caring. That's what communities do. Like that, we just, we show up. We we cook for each other. We help each other clean. We help each other pick up pieces of our broken lives.
It's a similar answer we give, when someone has a new baby. Don't put the weight on them, but also there's this added need or felt need to like manage our feelings as we ask you that, right? How you answer that. Will I upset them? Do they really want to know how I am? Do they really want to talk about the war? Probably not. And
Or if they're going to talk about the war, are we going to just talk about superficial things and then move on to talk about the daily mundane. And it's like, if you're going to ask me that question, ask it knowing ahead of time, be willing to engage at a deeper level. Give, and that's something that requires time. And sadly, it's just, and again, my anti-capitalist self just goes back to that side of like our, our, our capitalist modern lifestyle does not give us that time.
It does not.
Requires us to be efficient, even in our care with each other, even in our checking in conversations, in our therapy. Like our therapy, even here, our Western therapy is built on, and that's something a friend of mine was discussing. And I'm lucky that I've tried to surround myself with those who are willing to engage in meaningful conversations, that are willing to grant me and grant themselves the time and space. And I can't speak on behalf of all of the people in the diaspora. So I do recognize that that's a privilege that I have. I've surrounded myself with a beautiful community here, but it takes an effort too. Like I've had to put myself out there, and that's not everyone in the diaspora. People sometimes don't have that energy and time to put themselves out there. So you have to carve that for them. If you're coming from a proper caring place, a place of care. But to go back to, we were just talking about our Western therapy models and how they pretty much steer us towards productivity. We're working towards reducing our anxiety so we can become more productive, not so we can become better users of our time, so we can produce, so we can become better, more efficient producers.
Now, not so we can strike some sort of
Yeah.
balance or
So hey Mo,
health.
let's get you back to feeling okay here, so you can just go back to being a producer.
That's the last thing I wanted for you.
Right? But we're talking like if we were to talk
No.
about the model of society
Yes,
we live in,
absolutely.
right? The model of news that we consume, like within a few weeks, our mainstream news outlets are reporting less and less because why distract people from that? We've moved on from the Epstein files already. We've moved on from the war that we've waged and caused destructions for millions on the other side of the world. And we're just going to move on to what's next.
I can't even imagine, especially in all of this, trying to find somebody also that you can talk to that maybe doesn't understand, but will provide space for the very justified anger or the talk about resistance. And, here in Canada, armed resistance is criminalized in so many ways, but particularly Lebanese, and
It's because
Hezbollah.
we've just followed the West's description of what terrorism is, and we've just ran with it.
Yep. But then, like, what does that do for you as a member of the diaspora then? Who then, you talked about that push and pull of leaving, right? It's unsafe conditions. You have a family to return to. Everyone over here is just like holding their breath, wanting you to get home. And then that felt so insensitive at the same time because you don't want to leave either. It's this horrible position to be in that I don't envy. But then where does that leave you? What does then resistance look like to you here in Canada? And how I feel like sometimes we can say like simply existing, finding joy maybe in some mundane things, but like
It's not just simply existing.
that doesn't seem like enough.
It's exactly what we're doing right now. Um, it's engaging in those quote unquote difficult conversations, right? It's it's breaking the image, breaking the stereotype. It's looking forward to Easter weekend in a way where I will put the community interest above mine and engage in those difficult conversations. Because Lord knows that, well, Lord, uh,
It's Easter.
I don't even know if the Lord knows at this point, to be honest. One of them will know that those there will be so many meaningless, just touching on what's happening on the other side of the world, and then continuing on about talking about the Blue Jays and your favorite NHL team and your kids' travel hockey tryouts coming up, and but forcing that, and it's just a matter of being unselfish and not just considering just me and where I stand in my internal struggle of whether I'm here or there, whether how I feel about just being here safely with my kids and my partner versus leaving behind where I didn't want to leave. I did not want to leave my mom and my sister in my home, especially at a time of crisis. Like, I felt more safe maybe mentally, maybe physically not, because with a drone above your head 24/7, hearing the the air raids every night, like, I don't know if that is a definition of physical safety, but maybe your soul or your mind, knowing that you're in the land that you're from, in the home where you're from, with people that, a community that needs your support in a way, you're more useful and not productive, but more useful as a human being than being physically safe away from them. That's a big struggle. But putting that aside and engaging about talking about that community back home, talking about what is the definition of resistance, talking about why is resistance labeled as a terrorist organization when it isn't by its actions, uh, talking about what does it mean to you, that what is your home here, what if you were to be asked to leave your home here now, like, what would you do? Would you just leave your home and leave your farm and leave your land? And if you would, what kind of a privilege is that for you as a settler that isn't granted to other people? Because that privilege is not given to those people because that's their land. They don't want that. They actually don't want that privilege you have. They'd rather stay and die in that land because that's home. So it's engaging in those conversations that are not easy. And sometimes they might take turns that are upsetting. And it's just managing that upset and that rage and trying to, like, sway or educate at the end of the day. I'm not going to say sway. We're not going to be able to convince everyone, but to educate, to have those conversations.
And to some degrees humanize, and the fact that that task has to be done sometimes is so disheartening to me. But it's so easy for us to just call it that foreign land that's happening, and especially since we've spent 3 years kind of already watching what we've seen, and people are at a point of exhaustion as well, and I just don't want to get to that point of complicity or complete apathy. And so, talking about the destruction and giving it a human face too, like what it's doing to people, is an important task. But so I imagine it's draining for you.
Tell your, like, if you're in communities with Lebanese or Arab diaspora, give those communities space to speak about those subjects. Don't just ask how they're doing. Ask them to tell you what is going on and engage in those conversations.
I hope more folks will feel equipped to do that, and
yeah. And hey, if we're not equipped, we're literate enough to read. We are at a time where we pride ourselves with such abundance of access to knowledge, but so little desire for it. So I think that act of resistance is seek that knowledge.
We'll stuff the show notes of this episode with some resources for folks so they can do the work. I appreciate you doing this heavy lifting that you shouldn't have to do, but I wouldn't feel equipped talking about this subject or lending this kind of expertise without it. So finding that balance for yourself.
I think we all should do, out of empathy. And when we don't, is what I think the war machines are banking on. It's our complete lack of empathy to grant them this impunity to just make money off of our destruction.
Thank you, Mo.
Jessa, thank you. Thank you. You don't, I don't know if you understand the importance of granting Mo the space and time and energy to have those conversations. Thank you for doing all the work that you do always with Blueprints of Disruption and with all of your activism work. Comrade Jessa, keep at it.
Thank you, brother. That is a wrap on another episode of Blueprints of Disruption. Thank you for joining us. Also, a very big thank you to the producer of our show, Santiago Halu Quintero. Blueprints of Disruption is an independent production operated cooperatively. You can follow us on Twitter at BP of Disruption. If you'd like to help us continue disrupting the status quo, please share our content, and if you have the means, consider becoming a patron. Not only does our support come from the progressive community, so does our content. So reach out to us and let us know what or who we should be amplifying. So until next time, keep disrupting.